Greg, you had really dedicated so many years to covering Yemen and then found yourself narrowly escaping a threat on your life. Can you share once more your story of what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I was working for BuzzFeed at the time, which does so much to protect us journalists in the field, a really great organization, and they certainly gave me a lot of support. And I went to Yemen with the idea of pursuing sort of three long stories, three long-form stories. I mean, as journalists, as people, the world so often doesn't make sense, and we go and we're there on the ground and we're trying to put these different pieces together and we're trying to talk to people. We're trying to find this little corner of the world that we can look at, understand in some small way, and then convey that back to people in the United States or whoever's reading online or in print, just in a way that sort of explains this is what's happening and this is how it fits into the world. Because otherwise, I mean, the news is always coming at us. It's constant. It's bombarding us with news of attacks here and attacks there. And so that's what I wanted to do in Yemen. And I had I spent about 3 weeks there. It was a country that I had been traveling to for about a decade, but it looked the same, but it had changed quite dramatically. The sense on the street that I had was a lot different. Just a few months before I went there was an American named Luke Summers who did freelance photography. Luke was kidnapped on Zubairi Street, and when I went there, he hadn't been found. He was somebody who when the kidnappers came, they pushed him in the car, and he went in the car. And when I was there, he was still alive. There was another individual, a German diplomat, who tried to resist a kidnapping in the capital city of Sana'a, and the kidnappers chased him down and executed him in the grocery store.
And so, this was what year?
Both of these were in, the kidnappings happened in 2013, right at the end, and I went in 2014.
So this is the Yemen you knew becoming unhinged?
Yeah, it was changing it was changing so dramatically. I mean, the president that had been there for 33 years, he was gone. No one really knew, before the Arab Spring, people had a sense of what the rules were. Like, you could do this, you couldn't do this. After the Arab Spring, everything changed, and you no longer knew what the rules were. And so right at the end of my trip is just sort of the one last story that I really wanted to grasp. A good friend who was my fixer, we went and we were buying an airline ticket for this guy to come up to the capital so we could interview him because it was too dangerous for us to travel. And it was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. We were walking down Zubairi Street, a major street in Sana'a. My friend sort of bumped into a guy dressed in military fatigues, caught his jacket on the guy's gun, and the guy sort of stared at us. And then we went and we had breakfast, and when we walked out about 10 minutes later, this guy had another guy, and he went up to my friend and he said, he's speaking in Arabic, he said, "Who is this with you?" And they went through, and he said, "Is he a foreigner?" And my friend said, "Yes, he's an American." And then they started pulling us to the car, and I had, I'd talked to my fiance, my wife now at the time, about some of these things, because like Joel said, so much has changed. It's not what it once was, and so you knew that there was a chance of these kidnappings. And what is it that you do? Do you do what the German diplomat did and try to escape, or do you do what Luke Summers did and go? And Luke was alive and the German wasn't. And as I realized that the kidnapping was happening, it was a busy street. There was 20, 25 Yemenis just standing around watching this happen. Two guys with guns pull us toward a taxi with its back door wide open. I just couldn't get in the car, and so we resisted. And the guy dropped my friend's arm, and the guy who was holding my arm like this, they dropped my arm and chambered a bullet in the gun. And then right before, there was a second where right before he shot, we stared at each other. I took off running, my friend took off running, and he never shot, and they got in the car and went away. But that's how these things work. Luke, the German, they chased him down and they executed him. Me, I ran into a little restaurant on the street, and they didn't follow and they didn't shoot. Luke got in the car and he was alive for a while, and then there was a rescue attempt that U.S. Special Forces went in, and Luke was killed in that rescue attempt. And so these are 3 cases, and 2 of them died, and I didn't die, and there's really no rhyme or reason as to why it happened one way and didn't happen, because the actions were so similar.
Did you somehow feel betrayed by the place you had devoted yourself to so much?
Yeah, Yemen is. Yeah, I think there's a sense of that because I'd been traveling there since 2003. This was in 2014. There were many Yemenis that I considered quite close friends, we talked a little bit about sort of the sense of vulnerability that the press card gives you. There's also a sense of vulnerability, or of invulnerability rather, when you go to a place that you know so well. And you're relying so much on the generosity of these people, and so many of them welcome you into their home. They take care of you. In fact, on that same trip, I was speaking with a sheikh, and he said, you know, I'm not going to let you leave my house without a bodyguard because you'll get kidnapped. So he sent me with a tribal delegation of bodyguards that took me back to the place where I was staying. And so there are these things that happen, and you really do feel like, okay, this society has welcomed me and they are protecting me. And of course, in Arab society, you often hear, you know, these ahlan wa sahlan, you know, welcome, you're here, you're under my protection. But then in that moment, after the Arab Spring, when the rules have changed, on this very busy street, 20 Yemenis just watching one other Yemeni and an American be kidnapped and doing nothing. This has become, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in other places, this has just become normal. And when no one knows the rules, no one's willing to step out. So there was a sense of betrayal, yeah, or at least a shattering of illusions that I'd held as someone who had traveled to this place, and to see it changing so much for the worse was tough to take.
Would you go back?
I tried to go back earlier this year. We were talking before, and there are trips that you take before you're married, and there are things that you do after.
When you're pregnant.
When you're pregnant, when you're expecting.
You host panels in Manhattan.
So I would like to at some point, but I don't think it'll be anytime soon.
I have to ask you one more question, completely off the grid. In homage to everything you've done on this story, can you tell us in a nutshell what's going on in Yemen? It would be wrong not to. I mean, it felt wrong not to ask.
Sure. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's an 8-sided civil war. The Saudis are bombing a Shia rebel group which has taken over the government. The Saudis are under the impression that the rebel group is a proxy of Iran, which I don't buy. The U.S. is supporting Saudi Arabia bombing the Shia rebel group, which has opened up a great deal of room for Al-Qaeda and ISIS to take over territory. For quite a long time, you had the internationally recognized president who was in exile, the former overthrown president who was at home in Sana'a directing troops as well. And so it's become incredibly muddy, incredibly murky. The Saudis went in March with the idea that airstrikes would win the war in a couple of weeks. Now they've inserted ground troops. There's peace talks today in Switzerland. But there's really, much like the conflict in Syria, it's become so intractable that no one knows what a solution would look like anymore. Do the Saudis sort of back down and then allow the Houthis to declare victory, this Shia rebel group? Or do they continue to double down in the hope that eventually they'll be able to do more of what it is that they'll be doing, more bombing, and that will actually have different results than it's had over these past 9 months?